this, I have not seen this particular analytic strategy reported. Again, it may be done frequently, but it's not, I didn't see it reported, so. And this Lewis, Karen Seashore Lewis, if you read older educational research literature, she was a very, very well-regarded educational researcher from days past. This study was a multi-site, longitudinal study of the Research and Development Utilization Program, which was a demonstration project funded by our National Institute of Education. The focus of the study, the focus of the project, was to promote the adoption and implementation of new curricula and staff development materials in 300 local schools. It's a big study, and there were a variety of methods used of many types, from records to on-site observations. They were trying to see how well schools implemented some new materials for curriculum and staff training. So that's a big question. Lots of different measures of lots of different types. But no more than 20% of the sites had a complete data set. I don't know, is this common? Missing data? And the authors say this seriously constrained cross-site analysis, which was the purpose of the study. So what they did, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to explain it. They used a consolidated coding form to create a consolidated data set for each of the schools. They did this by rating the raw data on 240 items. Most of these 240 items were at a higher level than the actual data. For example, rather than having information on decisions made, they rated the quality of the decision making. The team debated for 2 days over this coding and tried to reach common interpretations during that time period. So to say this a little more clearly, they had a lot of data from surveys, observations from teachers, from school leaders, from observations of what was going on in the classroom about implementation of these curriculum and staff development materials. Lots of data at the level of classroom and teacher. 20% of that was complete for each school. So this consolidated coding form took the level of the construct up a level, higher level construct. Instead of, what are the decisions you made about implementation of this curriculum? They had a variable called quality of decision making. So they took the constructs being measured up a level of abstraction. And the staff spent 2 days together in a locked room and rated the schools on these higher level scale variables to fill in the data. Which is a controversial process. And they were able to do some analyses. And this is the reflections by the senior educational researcher about the process that they used. Can a database composed of numbers that is entirely dependent on the iterative judgments of experienced site field teams be described as only quantitative. And if you ever wanted to do this process, this requires highly skilled inquirers, both qualitative and quantitative methods, who are relatively free of paradigmatic preferences, meaning they respect and understand the role of different methodologies and different assumptions. So any comments or questions on this? Nobody, everyone thinks this is fine. Nobody has any objections to this strategy. Okay. None you want to voice, that's okay. This, in other times, there are people who say, you can't do that. Because you're taking data from respondents, from teachers, or data from principals, or data from observations, and it becomes data generated by the researchers, because they judge. They judge this. So this is a strategy that not everybody thinks is a very good idea. And it's fine if you don't think so. I think, again, most of our social science data is already judgmental. So, okay, gonna move on. So we're going to the next category. This first category was transforming data to allow for joint analysis of 2 or more data sets together. We have to get them in the same form. And then the other strategy was merging data, moving it to a higher level and merging, consolidating data again, so we can analyze it all together. The second category, I think, is the richest. I think has the most opportunities for being creative and taking advantage of opportunities that occur. So I think there are more good examples in this category than in the others. And these might be some of the reasons. This is a category of integrated analysis best used in the middle of an analysis as we're going along. We've already done our data reduction and data description. That happens before integrated analysis. And I see this as we're trying to look for patterns of relationship in our data. What goes with what? Which schools or teachers showed a willingness to adopt new curricula, which schools and teachers did not. And how might those schools and teachers be different from one another? We're looking for relational dimensions and emerging findings. We're not at the final conclusion level. We're looking, it's like a correlation analysis. We're looking for things, patterns of meaning and patterns of threads of relationship. As with, I think, almost all mixed methods integrative analysis, these are best taken with a spirit of adventure. Is anybody here familiar with the I'm going to forget the name of the book, but it's a data analysis book that now has 3 editions, written by Matthew Miles and Michael Huberman. Miles and Huberman. It's a white book with black letters, and it's about qualitative data analysis. And in that book, they break all the qualitative data analysis rules because they want qualitative analysts not just to think textually. They want analysts to think spatially, to think relationally. So some of these ideas that have come up, through example, in the mixed methods literature, remind me of that book. It's a very good book for doing something other than thematic coding with your qualitative data. And back to the slide, this basic idea is to take the relational structure of meaning from one data set and apply it to another and see what's learned. This is adventuresome. You might not learn anything, but you might. For example, you could recluster your qualitative interview data by your quantitative survey scales or survey factors, and then examine the clusters for internal, external similarities and differences. So the structure of meaning of your survey is your scales or your factors. We're measuring 3 dimensions of self-concept. Rarely are surveys just single item reporting. We're measuring something higher order, and we use multiple items to generate a scale or a factor. The idea is to take that structure of meaning, impose it on your qualitative data. So you categorize your qualitative data by that structure of meaning and see what you've learned. That's kind of the basic idea. These are 3 main types so far. Cautions here. Again, sampling considerations are always a caution in integrated data analysis because some joint analyses require more people in the qualitative sample than you might usually have. There are assumptions of these analyses that you might be keen to uphold, and the joint analysis may threaten them. And here's an example: risks to methodological rigor and quality. What happens to an estimated standard error for your survey responses when those responses get reconfigured? So, an example, concerns. So here's my first example. Involves data comparison, transformation, and importation. This was a national study of preschool inclusion. In the US, preschool inclusion means including children with disabilities in the class of children who don't have disabilities. So that's what inclusion means. 16 sites, so it's a big study. The key questions of the study involved meanings and manifestations of inclusion. Well, what did inclusion mean at these various 16 sites, and what did it look like? One of the authors, the second author, Jules Marquardt, I was one of her professors, so she was expert in mixed methods, of course. And she helped design this study. And you can see that there are multiple measures, structured and unstructured observations of classroom interactions. Who's playing with whom? Are the children with disabilities playing with other children or not? Both interviews and questionnaires to assess parent perceptions and understandings of what was happening with their child. both interviews and questionnaires, measuring the teachers' philosophies and perceptions. And then some sociograms of children's social relations. So this was a very mixed study. What I want to do is take an excerpt from this article illustrating one mixed methods analysis. This was at the point in the study where they were generating descriptive reports for each of the 16 schools. They were trying to synthesize all the data they had for each of the 16 schools to generate a written report to answer the questions. What are the meanings of inclusion amongst the staff and parents and others at each school? And what does it look like? Those are their key research questions. So this analysis that I'm going to show comes from one school in this effort to summarize and synthesize their data descriptively for each school. And this had to do with the observations of the children's interactions in the classroom, in the sociograms. So they generated some qualitative themes, as we do in qualitative analysis. We say, oh, we can chunk these data into 6 main themes that describes what's going on. They also generated some quantitative tables and graphs to try to quantitatively summarize how many times a child with a disability interacted with another child, where did this happen. So it was various variables that were reflected in these two methods, and quite similar variables by intention, by design. Then they transformed their qualitative themes into some kind of ordered matrix. They imposed an order on the qualitative themes, low to high, good to bad. I think it was descriptive, low to high. They weren't judging, they were describing. And they transformed their quantitative tables and graphs into narrative summaries, rich narrative summaries. You know, what happened in the block corner? What happened in the doll corner? What happened on the water table? So they were rich narrative descriptions of children's interactions with one another, as we might find from a qualitative study. And they brought each of these transformed summaries to the other side, and then they compared them. So they compared the transformed quantitative data as narrative summaries to the original qualitative themes, and they transformed the qualitative data, which was in ordered matrices, to the original quantitative tables and graphs. So they put each data in the form of the other, which allowed for easier comparisons. It's hard to compare tables and graphs with narrative themes. It's just hard, cognitively. So they transformed each one to allow for an easier comparison. And of course, this is worthy because they had a very important insight in this one school. If it was simply descriptive, it might not be all that worthy. But what they found through this analysis in this one school was some odd patterns for one of the children with disabilities. That in some cases, often preschools have circle time. You come and sit on the rug in a circle to start the day. In preschools in the US, they have circle time, where everybody sits on the rug, and it's a time to be together and maybe go through the day or sing a song or have a couple of welcome rituals. And there was this one little girl in this school. Yeah. Okay, okay. Who sometimes stayed in circle time and sometimes didn't. And sometimes was asked to stay in circle times and sometimes was not. Her behavior was pretty consistent. She didn't like circle time, but the response to that behavior was not always consistent. And what they found from this example is that the classroom teacher in that classroom had a different philosophy of inclusion than the special education teacher. The classroom teacher believed that inclusion meant stay with the group. Don't treat people differently. Everybody is in circle time. And the special education teacher had a philosophy of inclusion that said children need to do different things sometimes. So it was fine if this little girl left circle time. That idea of two different philosophies of inclusion is central to this study. It's what they were studying, the meanings and enactments of inclusion. And I'm surprised that they didn't find this out in other methods, like teacher interviews, but they didn't. They hadn't known this. So this is a significant finding revealed from a mixed methods analysis. So I like it a lot. I don't think the mixed methods analysis are usually quite that important. But even if we don't get that significant findings, I very much like this idea of getting data in the same form to enable one to make comparisons. Okay, we're going on to another study. So anytime you have a question or want to protest, feel free. The first author of this study got her doctorate from the University of Illinois, where I work. So she also was indoctrinated into mixed methods, the mixed methods ideology. And these other authors are her graduate students. The first author of this study now works at OISE, the Ontario Institute for the Study of Education in Toronto, Canada. Very well-known educational institution for educational education and research. And they received some funding from the government to develop a multidimensional understanding of school success for schools that serve low-income immigrant families and children. I think Toronto is one of the most diverse cities in the world. I hear this. So this was in Toronto, and the government wanted to understand, among the many immigrants who are coming to our city, some schools are doing well. Let's understand that process better so that we might transfer it more broadly. So they selected 20 schools purposefully who were consensually regarded as being successful with immigrant populations. And they did what's called a concurrent mixed methods design. The methods were implemented at the same time. So what's being studied doesn't change. And they conducted interviews and surveys with teachers and principals. So that's where the mixing happens. because with the students and parents, they collected data primarily through focus groups. The purpose of this mixed method study, the mixed methods purpose was complementarity. We're trying to have a better understanding, multidimensional, complex understanding of what school success looks like at these 20 schools. So now we're talking about the interviews and surveys with teachers and principals. They analyzed their interview data and generated 11 themes associated with school improvement / success. Okay? They analyzed their survey data and had 9 factors associated with school improvement / success. So then they embarked on a process of some mixed methods analysis. One that they did, and this is similar to the last strategy, they transformed their survey results to narrative form. They wrote rich descriptions of each survey factor and the results for each school about it. It's like our preschool study. They transformed the survey results. Instead of saying 3.2, they said this school had a moderately high score on welcoming families into the school. Their welcome practices look like this. So they had a textual, rich description of each factor for each school as transformed. Which then allows a comparison with the qualitative themes. You can compare 2 narratives much more easily than a number and a narrative. So that was interesting and generated some insights into the character of school success and improvement at these schools. They got some results from this. And then they went on. Then they rescaled the survey with the themes from the interview. Okay, they took the structure of meaning of the interview and imposed it on the survey. Of the 75 survey items, 63 were judged to be relevant to the interview themes, and the remainder were something else. 3 themes were not present in the survey items. So they took the remaining 63 items and assigned them to one of the 8 themes. That is, they used the structure of meaning in the interview data to rescale the survey. And then they reanalyzed the survey data. One of the big advantages of this analysis, which was that they're blended scales, that's what they called them, the survey scales that came from the interview themes, they called them blended scales. That there was more variation in these blended scales for their 20 schools, which is very helpful. Variation is helpful in discerning patterns. Remember, this was a purposeful sample of 20 schools doing well with immigrant children. So it's hard to discern differences among a purposeful sample of success. But these blended themes offered some opportunities to do that. So they further analyzed these blended scales. One thing that they did was they identified schools that had extreme scores on these blended scales. Very high and very low. And here it is again. They went back to the qualitative data to develop a contextually rich narrative of the nature and contours of that theme at selected school. Going back to the qualitative data, I think, is very important. And then they wrote quite extensive case profiles of each theme to help understand what high and low looks like. What is the context for high and low on that blended theme? What other things are going on at that school? How might we differentiate that school from others based on these sets of results? And an example, I have this bulleted, but it was actually extended rich narrative description. For the parent involvement theme, a school that was exceptionally high on this theme served a community with 25 different languages. The school was very active in multiple parent programs, some in partnership with local agencies. One teacher had the job of serving as a community liaison with parents and families. The principal walked around the neighborhood getting to know families and people. The principal's the head of the school, also personally visited parents and children who were being placed at risk for not doing very well and generated with them a plan for their child. Parents perceived the school as welcoming and on their side. For a school very low on the parent involvement theme, had similar demographic indicators as the high school. It wasn't different in that sense. Had the same history, recent academic success. But they had another agenda at that time. They were concentrating on school safety. So the resources in the first school that were going to parent involvement, in this school were going to school safety. The principal of the school reported recognizing the importance of parent involvement and has that on a future agenda. So this is a study where the first author intentionally experimented with these kinds of integrated data analysis. In my view, generating results that would not have been generated otherwise. Comments, questions, challenges? Sí. Oh, yes, Mike.
Allí.
Como nadie habla, voy a romper yo todo. De todo esto me surge una... Yo he apuntado muchos temas que me gustaría, que me rondan por la cabeza y que me gusta comentar, que son parte de la discusión que muchas veces tenemos entre nosotros, en Mixtos. Pero yo ahora mismo me pregunto, ¿entendemos la importancia de la inferencia que hacemos de los datos y los convertimos en esos aspectos que al final se terminan convirtiendo en categorías? Yo creo que tendríamos que dar un primer paso para ponernos de acuerdo en cómo generamos esa inferencia y cómo aceptamos que esa inferencia tiene valor, no válida, tiene valor. Esa sería mi pregunta. Es decir, ¿cuánto de acuerdo tenemos en cómo generar ese proceso de inferencia? No sé si me explico bien o...
¿Asking me?
No, a ti y a toda la sala. Es decir, porque probablemente a lo mejor estamos diciendo, aquí vale, sí, el diseño es elaborado, hemos convertido información que nos llega de múltiples sitios en datos, pero claro, el problema es, vale, de acuerdo, si vamos a aceptar que la inferencia que yo haga, fundamentada, informada y tal, lo vamos a aceptar, entonces podremos llegar al acuerdo para poder generar un proceso de interpretación adecuado. Si no entendemos eso, o si no buscamos un sistema de acuerdo, a lo mejor no llegamos a generar ese proceso de interpretación que tienen todos esos ejemplos que he puesto. Bueno.
Buenas tardes. Me gustaría primero aclarar la diferencia, si tenemos claro lo que es una evidencia de una inferencia. A partir de tener clara la evidencia, cómo ha sido esta obtenida, con qué procedimientos y a qué pregunta la investigación respondía, podemos inferir a veces, pero no siempre es necesario establecer inferencias, con la idea de interpretar, en las palabras del autor, de generalización. ¿No?
De organizar la información. Tenemos que organizar la información. Y tenemos que saber que eso podemos trasladarlo a un dato. Y dentro de ese tipo de datos, generar tipología.
Para que yo pueda entender. Gracias.
No, la evidencia es algo que recogemos y que una vez recogida entendemos que se convierte en un dato. Ese dato después lo transformamos, lo inferimos, lo interpretamos. El problema es que no siempre hay acuerdo en ese proceso de interpretación a la hora de decidir. Esto es un dato. Y este dato se convierte en... Ese era mi punto. Yo creo que ahí es donde muchas veces nos encontramos la controversia, el problema. Y a mí sí me gustaría que Jennifer nos diera la opinión y que la gente diera su opinión. Pero yo no, o sea, hay datos que definen cosas directamente y son evidencias. Es decir, hay que inferir poco, pero la mayoría de los datos hay que inferirlo.
Jennifer Greene conocerá el cuento de Blancanieves que utiliza Patton para explicar la evaluación y donde establece la distinción entre las distintas modelos de interpretación de los datos. Quizá ese cuento pueda venir a cuento, a colación, en este momento y sería ilustrativo de cómo cuando la madrastra se mira en el espejo y le pregunta acerca de quién es la más guapa del reino, el espejo le responde que dependiendo a quién pregunte obtendría diferentes resultados.
Ya, recuerdo. Well, let me offer a thought on Bartol's question. I do think that these mixed methods analyses risk distorting somehow our confidence in the quality of the data set. We collect data carefully. We develop instruments. We study those instruments in various ways. and try to establish in quantitative language good estimates of the reliability and validity of our inferences from those instruments. And then we use them in a study. We do similar processes with interviews. One process that's become very popular in my country, maybe here as well, is the idea of doing a set of cognitive interviews first on an interview guide. You try out interviews with a teacher and ask the teacher to say a little bit more about her understanding of the question and why that answer. You're trying to see if the question is being interpreted in the way you hope it will be. They do cognitive interviews with surveys as well. So we spend a lot of time on the measures we use to try to gather data about educational and social phenomena. And so when we implement those methods and measures as intended, we can have some confidence that the data are what we think they are. And we can do some analyses of those data and so forth. I do think there's a risk here that when you take the data you got from some interviews and do something else to it, like quantify it, I do believe that there can be some risk to the quality of the data and our inferences from it. So I think that's a risk, and I invite any interested methodologists here to pursue that empirically. I think there is some risk. On the other hand, the other mirror from the stepmother, everything we do in the social world is a matter of construction. We don't get real data ever. We get people's interpretations and constructions of meaning. So this is the other hand. I think we should feel liberated to work the data, transform it, combine it, turn it upside down, as a means to be more insightful, as a means to learn more from this data set, because it's not ever truth. It's never true. It's just one set of responses on one day to one instrument, or a bunch of interviews that we did, hopefully with people responding as best they could. But I see both of those cases. On the one hand, we spend a lot of time developing instruments and generating data we believe we can have confidence in. On the other hand, we have to remember none of our data, or very little of our social data, is true. It's temporary, it's fleeting, if it was snowing outside, it'd be different. So I think that gives us some liberation to be cautious and mindful, but not scared. And it's why this idea of returning to the original data source and trying to, it's not validation, but it's going back to where we originally got these data for interpretation and elaboration and sense-making and grounding. That's not done very often. In data transformation, mixed method studies, we change our numbers to words, or our words to numbers, and go on. We don't go back to recapture the senses and the themes of the data in their original form as aids, as help to making inferences that probably are better warranted. So it's a very good point. Other comments, questions? Yes, Ena.
También puedo dejarlo para el final, ¿eh?
No. Tenemos un poco más.
No, me ha parecido especialmente interesante los ejemplos que se han ido comentando, porque se ha ido viendo cómo todas las perspectivas, tradiciones que se han ido explicando los días anteriores se han ejemplificado en casos concretos. Y especialmente, ese que a ti también te gusta, de la inclusión educativa, claro, como estamos en ese tema, pues veía interesante lo de la transformación, ese cruce, ¿no? Digamos, ese cruce de datos desde una perspectiva más cuantitativa a otra más cualitativa. Me venía a la mente, según estaba escuchándolo, el peligro o el riesgo, como acabáis de comentar antes, de esa transformación, ¿no? O sea, en primer lugar, ya es muy peligroso meter el conocimiento en cajas distintas. Y en segundo lugar, una vez que se ha metido en cajas distintas, se transforman. Y puede pasar como con el teléfono estropeado, ¿no? Que el mensaje al final llega un poco cambiado a la idea original. Entonces, en ese sentido, me parecía interesante, pero lo podemos dejar para el final, el comentar qué estrategias se podrían usar para que ese proceso de, no sé cómo decir, de riesgo, de falsificación o de no se produjera o se redujera al mínimo, ¿no? Esa era una idea que me parecía interesante. Y luego, bueno, otra, como es un poco más larga, la dejo para el final.
Go for it. Again, I welcome all of you to take up these kinds of challenges. Because it's, yes, I think we need good strategies. Again, this going back to the original data source is one strategy, but we need others. So yes, I totally agree with you. We need to be more sophisticated and thoughtful about this kind of mixing of data and analytic strategies. Okay. I think we're on the last group here. Yeah, last group. So these are often analyses conducted towards the end of a study. Not all levels of analysis are conducted in every study, but the last group are generally conducted towards the end of a study where we are intending to generate some inferences. So the primary focus of this set of analysis is the generation of defensible inferences from the joint, near the end, review and analysis of data from diverse sources. Some of these analyses could follow other mixed methods analyses. Others could be pursued on their own. My three categories are not to suggest every study does a mixed methods analysis in every category. They are simply a clustering of the analysis strategies we have found. So the three types so far, this is not a finished product, mixed methods, are warranted assertion analysis, pattern matching, and an integrated data display. I'm sure there's many cautions here, but I'll leave you to generate some. So this first comes from a work by Mary Lee Smith. She's a very senior, very, very well-regarded educational researcher and expert in qualitative methodologies. So I'm going to use some work that she did, published in a volume I helped edit about mixed methods evaluation. working on a large-scale longitudinal policy study of what was at that time a new Arizona Student Assessment Program. You can see the years 1990 to 1995. And in today's language, this was an early turn to standards-based accountability in education. Arizona loves testing, especially. So the point of this study was to understand teachers and principals' responses to this very significant mandate. In particular, the influences of this new accountability-oriented testing program on the curriculum, pedagogy, teaching, school organization, and teachers' meanings and actions, the kinds of sense teachers were making of this, and how that influenced what they did. This was a multi-phase study, large-scale study, and the mixed methods purposes that are present in this study are both development and complementarity. This started with an initial case study of 4 schools. This was to try to, I think, understand better how this accountability mandate was showing up in schools. Get a better sense of this on the ground. And here's the development part of mixed methods. They use the case study data to develop a survey that tested or assessed testing program principles. What were the principles involved in the testing program? Perceived characteristics of this testing program, validity and fairness, effects on teaching and learning, the survey was administered to samples of teachers and principals throughout the state. Now here's the complementarity part of mixed methods. The survey was accompanied by teacher focus groups in 4 selected schools. They analyzed and reported the results. And then Mary Lee, the author of this study, felt there was something more to be learned here. The first observation is the study yielded a massive amount of data of considerable unevenness and dissimilarity. Even so, she thought, the power of the data must lie in the integration of the power of the study must lie in the integration of data. There must be something more that can be done than report the survey data, focus group data, case study data separately. They're all different, they're saying different things, but the power of the study comes in putting them together, she thought. So she used a modified version of Fred Erickson's analytic induction method of qualitative analysis to this whole data set. Anybody know Fred Erickson or know of him? One of my favorite qualitative gurus. Just a wise, wise man. Just very wise. This analytic induction method for analyzing qualitative data is one that goes from the data to inferences. It's like many other qualitative analysis techniques where you sort the data into piles of similarity. But then once you have the piles, you don't have to go through many iterations. You go from piles to inferences. So that's what Mary Lee did. Just see where. This is, sorry, here's kind of the list of steps in the process, what she did. So assemble data in their rawest form. And for this study, the rawest data that she used were the interview transcripts from the teacher interviews and the survey frequencies. You can't go to individual survey forms. You have to get some frequencies. That's the rawest data which you can interpret. And then very importantly, you set aside your own prejudices regarding different types of data, potential to inform. Mary Lee is a very strong qualitative interpretivist evaluator and researcher, but she needed in this analysis not to privilege the words, but to see words and numbers as equally having equal power and equal ability in their potential to inform. I think that's not an easy task. And then you do the iterative process of reading the various data sets as a whole, working inductively, this is not unlike grounded theory, towards a set of warranted assertions. So my image, when I think about this study, is she took a large room like this, and she put all the data on the floor, all the teacher interviews on the floor, and all the survey results on the floor by school or by whatever aggregate unit there was. And she walked around, and she said, oh, this goes here, and this goes here. I'm sure she didn't do it this way, it's just my image of how she must have done this. And then she reviewed each pile, and she said, well, okay, this pile is too big, or it's too complex, I need to separate it out, and this piece of data over here actually goes here. But it is that inductive process of qualitative data analysis, but you're doing it with both numbers and words. You're doing it with kind of teachers' own accounts in their own words of what difference this new testing program had made to them in their work, and the survey results in kind of structured form by scale and by teacher and principal unit. So you do this repeatedly, and again, not towards a descriptive level, but towards an inference. The warranted assertion, the assertion is an inference, it's a result. We don't go through descriptive categories, we just go straight from the data to the results. That's another thing I think is really hard. Data, results. Iterate the data, but we're piling up conclusions, not categories. Going to conclusions directly, assertions. Warrant means justified by the data. So you can see assemble evidence for each claim, iteratively refine claims by reorganizing the data a wee bit till you have a claim, an assertion, an inference, and all the data below it that support that. Here's an example of one of the claims, final assertions. State inattention to the technical and administrative adequacy of the assessment and accountability system impeded coherent responses to the testing program's intentions. That's a pretty big inference. Some specific cause, some problem, and what happened to it. So again, maybe only Mary Lee can do this. Maybe the rest of us can do it with smaller data sets. But this is this kind of analysis that Fred Erickson has generated for qualitative data, and she applied it to a mixed data set and was able to generate assertions of this kind. There was something on the order of 15 final assertions. And what she did then was she presented the assertions, conclusions, inferences, and all the data that supported that for others to review and say, oh, this doesn't go here, but it does very, very transparent kind of process. I'll move a little faster here. I think we have 2 more. A second type of analysis that we can use to generate inferences at the end of a study comes from the logic of pattern matching, which I believe was initially developed. I don't remember why it was initially developed, so I think, but I'm not sure. I'm going to skip that part. Oh, it's from Donald Campbell. I thought it was from Donald Campbell. It's an analytic technique to assess the match or congruence between theoretical predicted patterns and empirical or observed patterns of interrelationships among a set of variables or constructs. So again, it's a fairly high-level matching of complex patterns. Campbell was a measurement guru and methodologist premier. Did a lot of measurement work early in his career, and so this was often used in construct validation studies. The match is typically made both statistically and visually. So in the Marquardt study, this was part of an overall evaluation of the effects of a particular child care program provided by a hospital system on employees' work-related attitudes and behaviors. How well is this child care system helping workers do their work and feel good about it? And what they used was a measurement pattern match to provide evidence for the construct validity of an evaluation instrument used to assess employees' attitudes and behaviors. In the original Donald Campbell pattern matching, it's all numbers. So what Jules Marquardt and her colleagues were doing was numbers and words. The multidimensional construct of interest there, again, was how well his child care system was helping generate attitudinal, behavioral, and organizational concepts related to employer-sponsored child care. So the hospital had an investment in this child care system and wanted to know how employees' attitudes, behaviors, and organizational liking or the strength in their organizational commitment, how that complex set of attitudes was being affected by the provision of child care. So you can see the sample included, sample concepts included attitudes, more specifically recruitment, job satisfaction and stress, behaviors, absenteeism and turnover, and perceived organizational characteristics, personnel policies, supervisor relationships, child care satisfaction. The process involved the development of an expected or theoretical pattern of relationships among these concepts. We expect them to show this kind of relationship one with the other. An empirical assessment of the observed pattern of relationships among these concepts. And the comparison of the match. That's the basic process. So the development of the expected or theoretical pattern of relationships used a concept mapping process. Anybody familiar with concept mapping?
No se oye.
Ahora.
Sí.
¿Alguien conoce el concepto de mapas conceptuales? ¿La creación de mapas conceptuales o el mapeo conceptual?
Sí.
Let's take a break now, because this is a long example. Don't take a break now. Yeah, I think it's good. Because this is a long exam, complicated.
Okay. Pues hacemos un descansito de un cuarto de hora, ¿no? Y volvemos a escuchar el largo ejemplo.